Hello quilters. Well, last week I introduced you to the little mini Christmas ornaments that I'm making, and today I thought I would show you how I do the quilting, and then later on also the binding on these little guys. So I have started here with pulling up my bobbin thread. I'm just going to stick that out of the way, and I have my needle in my down position where I start. I'm going to actually just go around like I did before, go around the outside edges of my pieced quilt here, and I'm going to start with a very tiny stitch. I actually have my stitch set to 0.4, so it's going to take just some tiny little stitches to begin with. See how tiny those are. Okay, and now I am going to switch to the stitch I want to use for my quilting stitch, which is a longer length. I'm on these little ones, I'm kind of happy with a 2.6 on my machine, and so I'm just going to continue. It's kind of like stitching in the ditch around the outside here. And you notice I have my needle, when I stop, it's in the down position, so that when I make my turns, everything is still lined up exactly the way it was before. I wandered off a little bit there, but that's okay. And I'm going pretty slow just so I can be accurate, more accurate anyway, on these little tiny pieces. Maybe one more stitch. I think I'll actually move this one manually so I get it right where I want it. Check and see where I'm at here. One more stitch. There we go. Almost back to where I started. Out of the way. Still need to move these threads out of the way here. I don't want to cut them off because I'm actually going to tuck them into the quilt when I have it done. Just secures them a little better. Okay, so I am back to my starting point. I'm going to switch back to that little teeny stitch I started with. And take 5 or 6 of those in there, and then pull out my little quilt. I'm going to trim the threads so that I have enough room to be able to thread them onto a hand sewing needle, and then tuck them into the quilt layers as well. Let's see if I can show you how I do that here with the needle. Maybe one with a little bigger eye than that one. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab these two that I started with, which are together here, and thread my needle. It's not going to happen while you're watching, of course. sometimes if I have trouble threading the needle, I just flip it over, and sometimes that works to get it through the little eye of the needle here. Just barely. Let's see if I can get a hold of it. Yeah. Alright. Hardest part about the whole process. Okay, and then I'm just going to go right in where these threads excuse me, came out. And run my needle not through the back, but in between the layers. Run my needle through, pop it up here. And then I'm going to do a little knot. So I'm wrapping around my needle twice and then around this way. Stick it right back in the hole I came up out of. Pull it tight there. And again, run it through the layers, but not out of the back of the quilt. Let's see what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to pull that and give it a little tug until the knot pops through, which it has done. So then I just kind of work the fabric over it so it covers up that hole a little bit. And then I will clip those, and that's nice and secure. But those threads are out of the way and everything will stay in place. And then I'll do the same thing with the other thread here on the top, and also that back bobbin thread. But for now, I'm going to show you that the next thing I'm going to do on this one, I decided I'm keeping the quilting really simple on these since it's so tiny. I'm just going to do the around the square here. Doing the same thing, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. And tuck them out of the way. I'm going to make sure that my other two threads are definitely out of my way since I haven't tucked them yet. And I'm going to start with those same tiny little stitches and then switch to my longer quilting stitch. And I'll just go around the inside edge of my square the same way that I went around the outside. And one more stitch. I think I'll do it manually again here just to get it right where I want it. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to continue around and finish it off like I did before and tuck those threads away. So I've got around the inside of this square now, so I finished my quilting, and I want to show you one more time how I deal with these threads. So I'm going to go back in the hole that this one's coming out of, right here, and work it through the layers of the batting. Again, I'm not going through the back side. I want to be careful not to do that. I'll just pop up here. So now I've come up away from where I went down in the thread, and you may be able to see the little hole where the thread came up there. So I'm going to make my knot, and again I just stick my needle here and wrap my needle twice in the thread, and then bring the part that I'm holding on to around and loop so that it makes a loop. It's pretty much like a French knot that we do in the embroidery. I think it's called a quilter's knot this time, but alrighty, and then I'm going to pull that until it pops right through there, and so that won't show, the little hole won't show once everything is all said and done. So there's another view of how I handle those threads. So I have finished the quilting around my square, and now I have trimmed it, and I'm not so worried about the size. You know, 3.5 is kind of what I'm shooting for, but more importantly, I'm making sure that I line up my 1/4 inch lines with the tips of my points on the turn dash so that they remain nice and sharp when I add the binding. So, and I went ahead and trimmed off all the extra. As you recall, when we quilted it, we had extra that we put on to make the quilting process a little easier, and so everything comes out nice and even at the end. So I have it trimmed, I have it quilted, and in my next video I'll show you how I do the binding.